Grandpa Shook come in through with Ned Kyle with a covered wagon, and they were coming across the prairie, and they got in a buffalo stampede, and they had to hide behind a tree and turn the horses loose, and the buffalo ruined their wagons and stuff. They just trampled them in, and they stood behind the trees. The buffalo was going by them on the run, and the horses run up on the hill. So after it was over, they went up and got the horses, and they rode them through the valley till they found a trapper and prospector there, and they got food from him. He helped them out there, and they got the horses going again, and they went on through the country there, and then they come around through Butte country and down that way and come into Missoula, and they ended up in Stevensville. And that's where he was for a year or so, in Stevensville. Then he decided to come up the valley, and he camped here at Darby for a few days, and then went on up, and he's under Shook Mountain. That's the ranch he settled on. And he was one of the first settlers in here at that time. And he married a girl to come in later into Darby, and they built a cabin up there under Shook Mountain, and he started logging there and put in a little sawmill. He used oxens. He had oxens for skidding logs and stuff, and he had some teams too, but skidding the logs off the ranch is what he done, cutting lumber. And you'd see a sleigh hauling logs in, and they'd have about 3 teams out in front pulling the sleigh. They all one guy driving them with one line, a head horse, and he just a jerk line. And he finally built a little home, quite a nice house there on the place, and years later it burned. But he named Trapper Peak. He was a kind of a surveyor for the government in a way, and he named Trapper Peak there, and the signs up here on the highway telling about him. And Grandpa Rouse worked for Plummer in Virginia City.
Sheriff Plummer?
Yeah, Sheriff Plummer. And he told him he knowed that Plummer was in with a gang that was robbing every people, because he heard them congesting together at the barn, see? He knowed he was right in with the gang because he heard the gang talking to him. And their password was Hangman. And he never did say nothing to Plummer or nothing, though, because he was afraid to. He just worked for him. And that's the way it was. My folks was in Canada, and they finally got money enough to come back down where Grandpa was. He sent them money to get home on. And they got a wagon and team and come from Canada, and I was born coming into Darby in the wagon. And Dad had got an Indian nurse to help us because Mom was terrible sick. And that's why I say I was born in Darby. I was still in the wagon yet. Then we went from there up to Grandpa's at Shook Mountain, and Dad helped there. They set up a sawmill. It was working in the mill there. And then he got into a thrashing crew. He got a thrashing machine and a steam engine. When World War I was on, I know that he was doing a lot of that. And they went up and down the valley thrashing people's crops down around the Charlotte's Heights and down through there and towards Hamilton. He traveled the roads, and when they come to the river, they could take the separator across the bridge, but they had to ford the river with the old steam engine. And that was quite a deal sometimes because the water was pretty deep, put the fire out. It was quite a time of it. When we went to Yellowstone, I can remember Grandpa going with a covered wagon, and he took the cow and the chickens and the farm practically along with us, so we'd have eggs to eat and milk to drink, and they went along with us and camped with us, right? Wherever we camped, here was the cow and a few chickens, you know. And they got so they just loved to go along with us because there's always a place for them. And we kept them with us. That's the way we had our meals. Took a month to go to Missoula and back. Yeah, we'd just take a month to go with the covered wagon if we went to Missoula, which that wasn't very often, I'll tell you. Once, maybe every 2 years, stuff they had to have or something. You know, but mostly it was out of the question of going to Missoula. Oh, there wasn't hardly any roads, just a dusty trail most of the places, a wagon track, and that's all the roads you had. There was no main roads. Later on, Roosevelt had them building roads. After the war, he put men to work by building the roads. Dirt roads and stuff. When the railroad come in here, the railroad went clear to the West Fork, up along here, on by here, and clear up to the West Fork. The railroad was that far up at that time, and Harper's was logging. We were just young kids, 12 and 14. Something like that, and we was up on Boulder Creek. Dad had a big flat. He was logging over here, and he give us the saw. He said, "Go fall one of them big trees." He says, "Learn how to be a sawyer." So we go over to a big tree down on the flat, great big one. We sawed the notch in, and then we sawed it off, and I don't know whatever happened, but we cut it right on, clear off. And the wind tipped it back enough to let us take the saw out through the cut. So we took it out and, well, we just leave it stand there. It's going to stand. We took off went over where Dad was and said, "Don't go over there because that tree's cut off." "What do you mean you got it cut off?" "Well," he said, "we took the saw out to cut and it's still standing." He says, "You damn little devil." He said, "I'll whip your butt for that because you know better than that. You don't cut them clear off." Pretty soon it fell over, you know. I remember I was about 16 and my sister was 14 and my smaller brother 12, and we were standing at the ranch, and Dad and them was up in the West Fork in the sawmill camp, and we stayed at the ranch and milked 13 cows and took the milk to the Harper's logging camp every morning. And I drove the school bus, 16 years old, an old Model T to start with. And I might get down here to Darby at 10 o'clock the next day getting down here because the road was so bad with snow and stuff. I wouldn't make it. And I done that for 2 years. Then I was coming down once with the old Model T, and the reddish rod come off, and I dove over towards the edge of the bridge, and down it went off in the river. And I got stopped, and I got out of the school bus, and I walked to school left the kids there, and I said to them there in the schoolhouse, I said, I'm not driving the school bus no more because I won't wreck a bunch of kids for all the tea in China. I said, you ain't repairing the trucks, and the reddish rod come off and run me down there in the river. So I quit driving the school bus right then. And I drove my own little rig to school from then on. I had a Model A, and Dad had got me. But I just wouldn't wreck these kids for no tea in China. We used to go up at the sawmill and throw slabs out and haul loads of slabs to the schoolhouse to keep the schoolhouse warm. They fired it in the boilers to heat the schoolhouse. Well, it gets cold and you can't crank them, you had to crank them with a crank, and when it gets down around zero, you can't turn them over. They're so stiff and froze up. So when I went to do the chores, I'd take a can of sawdust with a little fuel in it, and I'd light it and set it under them and leave it set there while I was doing the chores, and it'd heat the motor up so I could turn it over and crank it and start it. And that's the only way we could start them up there for the woods and the school bus and stuff. That's the way we always got the logs in. And we built a chute out of logs back into the woods. And up there they'd put the logs in the chute, and the horses one team of horses would pull 30 logs down the chute for, maybe 200 or 300 yards. And then another team would take it there and go on with it again until they got it to the mill. And that's the way the logs was brought out of the woods. There was no trucks or stuff to haul them. You put them in a V-chute and shot them down the hill with horses. On the West Fork, we had the chute coming right across the highway, what you might call the West Fork Road. There was no highway there, but a dirt road. And they had to go up over the chute to go up the road. And it took the logs into the mill. I drove for about 10 years to Missoula with 2 loads of lumber from the sawmill camp when I got older. I made 2 trips to Missoula every day with a load of lumber. It'd take all day for one trip, and I'd run another that night usually. Then the old man make me sleep for a day because I couldn't keep awake. I built a dam in the head of West Fork up in Boulder Creek. That's in the wilderness now. It wasn't at the time I built the dam. I built an 8-foot dam on that lake so we'd have water for our ranches, because we couldn't take the river water because it was already taken for the people down the valley. They had the water rights. So we had to make our own by putting a big dam up there, and I raised the lake 8-10 feet. And I was up there 7 months with a crew of men putting the dam in. And the dam is there with my name on it. It's in the wilderness now. They made it wilderness. But my big shield gate and stuff, and the name is on the dam in Boulder Creek up there 11 miles. Beautiful lake. I always tell them if they go fishing up there, they want to put the hook in their pocket because the fish will jump out and get it. The old Bob Laws, he was up the head of the river. He used to ride his horse 5 miles down to get his mail at Alta. They had a little stage at Alta Ranger Station. That's the oldest ranger station in the United States, is at Alta. And he used to go down there to get his mail, and he ride a horse. So he got him, as he saw in the catalog, this here motorbike, so he bought one. And he got it up there, and he said, ride the horse will ride the motorbike. He started down the trail on the motorbike, And he says there's a tree in the way and I couldn't knock it off. So there laid the motorbike, all smashed up against the tree. He went back and got on his horse and went and got the mail. The bike still was laying in the tree 10 years later. I don't know of any danger up here. I had Indians all around. I had Indians working for me. I had Indians at the Indian powwow. We got along with them all great. I had a lot of Indians working for me at the mill. Couldn't get help, during the war. See, they drafted me for the war, but they sent me back to run the sawmill. Neighbors helped one another. They didn't have a rest of them. If somebody was sick in their families and stuff, the neighbors would always go there and do their work or feed them or whatever. It was neighbors. And we had dances up there on the ranch. Grandpa had a big dance hall in that big house he built. And they'd have parties and dances there for the whole community. And if anybody needed help, they'd go build a building for them. They'd all get together and go out there and build the building. And it was help one another. That's the way it was. If they had potatoes and you had apples, you traded them back and forth. You didn't, that's the way they done. And meat, they got wild meat all the time, most of the time. There's lots of game. Well, we didn't use much meat. We catch fish, Ah.
Oh, there's a moose.
Hey.
Oh, yeah. Lady, don't chase him. Do you see this often, Roy? There's moose.
Yeah.
A mother and her babe.
Yeah. Yeah, they go through here pretty often.
Wow, that is so cool.
Yeah.
Not in Missoula so much.
You can't sit out here and not see the animals,
Yeah.
They come by. The deer's in here all the time. These kids nowadays, they don't have nothing to do, really. You take them and they ain't got chores to do. They go to school and then they get into mischief because they run around town. They ought to have something to do. Either get in a project or something, they can get interested in doing something and get out of the way and keep them getting into trouble. You take kids in town, they get together and that's what gets them into trouble because they don't have nothing to do. They'd be better off if they had some kind of chores or something for them to work at. We always had something to do at the ranch. I can remember one time my brother and I was anxious to go to Grandpa and Grandma's house for breakfast. And we didn't stay and feed the calves their milk, and the older ones got the milk, and the younger ones didn't. So when we come back to the house, Dad says, well, them little calves are still pretty hungry. I don't think they got their milk. What'd you guys do? Just go off and leave them? He knowed what we done. Yeah, we went to Grandpa's. Well, he says, go out and cut me a willow. So we goes out to cut a willow. He said, I want you each to cut me a willow. I want it. So we go out there, and my brother Walter, he cut one you could knock a cow down with, and I cut one that wouldn't stand up. And Dad set him in the corner. He said, I'll have him for next time.
You never know you were 93 years old, Roy.
Yeah, I'll be 94 pretty quick. Now it says Roy Shook, a legend in his own time.